All right, so let's dive right in. We're going deep into all this cybersecurity regulation stuff, specifically what's coming up for the UK and the EU. You've given us a really interesting mix of sources, like the EU's Cyber Resilience Act, and then the UK has their Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill coming up, and even some perspectives on DORA implementation.
Yeah, it's almost like a cybersecurity buffet here. And
Right.
we're going to try to help you pick out, the tastiest, the most important bites.
Exactly. Our mission here is to give you the knowledge to navigate all these changes
Yeah.
and ultimately, help your business be future ready.
Yeah.
That's Felicity Oswald's term, by the way.
Right. Well, and speaking of Felicity Oswald, the CEO of the UK's NCSC, her speech at Sabre UK was really pretty eye-opening. So before we even get into all the regulations themselves, I think it's worth kind of breaking down what she had to say.
Okay, so paint the picture for us.
Mhm.
What is the current threat landscape that she kind of laid out?
Well, she didn't really sugarcoat it. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, they're all still major players in this space. And what's really interesting is that, Russia's activity is actually continuing despite the war in Ukraine.
That's a bit worrying. Anything else we should be kind of keeping an eye on?
Oh, for sure. The conflict in Gaza adds another layer of complexity here. It potentially increases the risk of cyber attacks as well. And then, of course, we can't forget about good old-fashioned cybercrime. Ransomware, unfortunately, is still a top threat. And it can have just absolutely crippling consequences.
I remember she gave a specific example, the British Library ransomware attack. Was that something that you looked into?
Yes, it's a perfect case study. They actually chose not to pay the ransom,
Hmm.
which is a tough decision,
Mhm.
but I think it's very commendable. But the disruption to their operations was significant. So it just highlights the point that being prepared isn't just about, preventing the attack, but also what happens when something does happen.
Okay, so we've got this backdrop of all these kind of escalating cyber threats, and then ender stage left, we've got all of this regulation coming down the pipeline, both from the UK and from the EU. Let's start with the UK side of things. What's the deal with this Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill?
Well, the UK government realized that, their current regulations are a little bit behind the times, especially compared to what's happening in the EU. So this bill is their way of catching up and really addressing the evolving threat landscape. It's expected to come into force in 2025.
So 2025 is the year to watch then.
Mm.
What exactly is going to change? Like, what's the big picture for businesses?
Well, the scope of this bill is much wider. It aims to protect a lot more digital services and supply chains, which, as you know, are increasingly vulnerable to attacks. Think back to, the attacks on the NHS. This is exactly the kind of incident that this bill is trying to prevent.
So it sounds like they're giving regulators a lot more power as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It strengthens the role of regulators. It gives them the authority to proactively investigate vulnerabilities, to enforce stricter cybersecurity standards, and even to impose penalties for noncompliance.
Okay, so heads up, UK businesses, get your act together. When it comes to cybersecurity, what about on the EU side? Tell me about this Cyber Resilience Act I keep hearing about.
Yeah, think of this as like setting a new baseline for cybersecurity. And what's really interesting, it applies to pretty much everything with a digital element. So you're talking your laptop, your smartwatch, maybe even your smart refrigerator.
Whoa, hold on. My fridge needs to be cyber secure now. That's a bit much, isn't it?
Well, maybe not your fridge just yet. But the point is that the EU is taking this very comprehensive approach. So by 2027, manufacturers are going to have to meet specific cybersecurity requirements for any product with digital components that's sold in the EU. So they're essentially building security into the DNA of these products, from design all the way to disposal.
So it's like a cybersecurity stamp of approval, like the CE marking.
Exactly. And it really empowers businesses and consumers to make more informed choices about, the products that they're using. And it just ensures a minimum level of security across the board.
And then on top of that, we have DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act. It seems like the EU is really dizzy when it comes to cybersecurity.
They are. And, DORA focuses mainly on financial institutions, but it has ripple effects for any business that relies on ICT services. So you have to think about it this way. If your cloud provider or your payment processor is subject to DORA, it indirectly affects you too.
So even if you're not in the financial sector, DORA's reach is still pretty broad.
Yeah, and it's been really interesting to see some of the discussions that are happening behind the scenes. The ESAs are working with national authorities to figure out the details of this DORA implementation, and there have been some disagreements along the way.
Really? Give me an example.
Well, the European Commission actually rejected some of the technical standards that the ESA has proposed. They even had to appoint a dedicated DORA joint oversight director just to manage the complexity of this whole thing. So it just shows how comprehensive and intricate these regulations are.
Okay, so we've got this evolving cyber threat landscape. Felicity Oswald, ringing in our ears about the dangers.
Yeah.
And now we've got this wave of new regulations coming in. What does this all mean for our listeners? How can they actually prepare for this?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? First takeaway is that no business can afford to ignore cybersecurity, especially those providing essential services. The Felicity Oswalds of the world are watching. The good news is that both the UK and the EU are taking steps to strengthen those defenses, but businesses need to adapt to keep up.
And I'm guessing the first step is really understanding these new regulations and what they specifically require.
Oh, absolutely. And there's no better way to do that than to dive deeper into each of these regulations, which is exactly what we're going to be doing in the rest of our deep dive. So stay tuned.
It makes me think about the whole insurance angle.
Oh, yeah.
Cyber insurance has always been this kind of safety net.
Yeah.
For businesses. But how do these new regulations kind of change the game?
Well, I think for starters, insurance companies are going to be a lot more careful about who they give insurance to and how much they charge them. If a business hasn't really done what it needs to do to comply with these regulations, they might have a harder time getting insurance, or they might have to pay a lot more for it.
So it's not just a box-ticking exercise to, comply with the law. It's about showing that you're really serious about cybersecurity.
Exactly. And remember, that Cyber Essentials certificate we talked about earlier in the UK, that could become a real asset. When you're trying to get cyber insurance, it basically tells the insurance companies, hey, this business is taking cybersecurity seriously.
It's almost like a seal of approval.
Precisely. And we're actually seeing a shift in the insurance industry itself. It's not just about paying out money. After something bad happens, they're getting more involved in helping their clients prevent those attacks from happening in the first place.
Makes sense. I mean, they're in the business of managing risk.
Exactly.
So how are they actually doing that?
Well, they're offering more guidance, more resources, even partnering with cybersecurity firms to provide like a more complete protection package. It's becoming more of a team effort.
So they're realizing that it's better to prevent these things than to deal with the fallout later.
You got it. In fact, the NCSC in the UK, they're actually working with the insurance industry to develop specific guidance on ransomware attacks. It's not just about what to do if you're hit. It's about helping businesses make those really tough decisions when they're faced with a ransom demand.
Yeah, because that's not always so clear-cut.
Yeah.
Do you pay, do you not pay?
Exactly. And paying the ransom doesn't even guarantee that the attackers are going to give you your data back, and it could actually make you a bigger target in the future. So this new guidance is really going to help businesses weigh their options carefully.
Okay, so a lot to think about there. In terms of preventing attacks, managing risk, and understanding how insurance plays into all this. But let's zoom out for a second. Because these cyber attacks, they don't really care about geographical borders. This is a global issue.
Very true. And that makes international cooperation super important. But it can be tricky.
What are some of the challenges there?
Well, one of the biggest ones is trust. Countries don't always trust each other, especially when it comes to sharing sensitive information about cyber attacks.
It's like a catch-22. Sharing information about your weaknesses could actually make you more vulnerable.
Exactly. And then you've got different laws and regulations in different parts of the world, which can make it really hard to coordinate a response.
We're seeing this play out right now.
Yeah.
With the whole debate about China's cybersecurity laws.
Oh, yeah. That lack of transparency. The concerns about how data is being handled. That creates a lot of challenges. For international cooperation, both Felicity Oswald and Ann Neuberger, she's the U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology. They both brought up these concerns at Cyber UK.
It's a real geopolitical puzzle. But are we seeing any signs of progress at all?
I think we are. There are some promising initiatives out there. Organizations like the International Telecommunication Union and the UN, they're working to establish some global norms for responsible behavior in cyberspace.
Okay, that's a start. What about collaboration between individual countries?
Yeah, we're seeing more agreements between countries that are specifically focused on cybersecurity. These agreements often involve sharing threat intelligence, conducting joint exercises, even working together on investigations.
So if an attack starts in one country but impacts another country, these agreements kind of help them coordinate a response.
Exactly. And that's key, not just for responding to incidents, but also for preventing future attacks. and building resilience globally.
Speaking of building resilience, let's talk about technology, because it seems like there's a new cybersecurity threat popping up every day.
Oh, yeah. It's a constant game of cat and mouse. But the good news is technology is evolving on the defense side, too. And one of the most exciting developments is artificial intelligence, or AI, as everyone calls it.
AI, yeah,
Yeah.
I keep hearing about that. What are some of the ways that it's being used?
Well, it's already making a big impact. One of the things AI is really good at is analyzing huge amounts of data and finding patterns that humans might miss. This can help identify things that are out of the ordinary. That could be a sign of a cyber attack. And it can even help predict potential threats before they even happen.
So it's like having an extra set of eyes, constantly scanning your systems.
Exactly. And because AI can do some tasks automatically, like responding to those low-level threats, it frees up human analysts to focus on the more complex stuff.
Okay, so it's like a force multiplier.
Definitely. And AI can also help with threat intelligence by going through data from all sorts of sources to find those emerging threats and vulnerabilities.
So it's not just about reacting, it's about getting ahead of the curve.
Right.
That sounds pretty promising.
Mm-hmm.
But is there a downside to all this?
Well, there are some challenges. One is data bias. AI systems are only as good as the data they're trained on. So if the data is biased or incomplete, the AI system can make bad decisions.
So, like, it might think something is an attack when it's actually harmless.
That's possible, and that's why you still need human oversight, even with AI systems. Another concern is that the bad guys are also starting to use AI.
Oh, great. So we could see AI-powered attacks.
It's a real concern, but overall, I think AI has the potential to be a really powerful tool for good in cybersecurity. The key is to use it responsibly and with the right safeguards in place.
Makes sense. Now, another technology that I keep hearing about is quantum computing.
Yeah.
It all sounds very futuristic. What do you think about how that's going to impact cybersecurity?
Well, it's still early days for quantum computing, but it has the potential to change a lot of things, including cybersecurity. One of the most exciting things about it is that it could lead to new encryption algorithms that are way more secure, even against the most powerful computers we have today.
Because quantum computers can do calculations that are impossible for normal computers.
Exactly. But here's the catch. That same power could also be used to break the encryption algorithms that we rely on right now to protect our data.
So it's a double-edged sword.
It is.
So quantum computing could make things better or could make things worse.
Right.
So we need to be thinking ahead.
Absolutely. We need to start preparing now for a future where quantum computers are a reality. That means exploring new security protocols that can withstand quantum attacks.
Okay, so long-term thinking is important, but let's bring it back to the present. What can businesses do right now to improve their cybersecurity?
Well, the first step is to understand those new regulations like we've been talking about. And then it's about being proactive. And that involves 3 key areas.
Okay, let's break those down. What's the first area?
People.
Yeah.
Your employees are your first line of defense. You got to make sure they know about the risks and that they have the training they need to spot and respond to potential threats.
So human error is often a factor in these attacks.
Absolutely.
So you want to make sure your employees are equipped to make smart decisions.
Exactly.
Okay, what's the second area?
Processes. You need to have clear security policies and procedures, like an incident response plan, data backup and recovery procedures, access control policies.
So it's about having a system in place
Right.
and making sure everyone knows how to follow it.
Exactly.
And the third area,
Technology. You got to invest in the right security technologies. Things like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, anti-malware software, data encryption tools, and don't forget about multi-factor authentication. That's essential these days.
so it's about layers of protection.
Exactly. Multiple layers.
Yeah.
Because no single solution is perfect.
You're assuming that some attacks will get through.
It's a realistic approach. And then don't forget about monitoring and maintenance. Cybersecurity isn't a set it and forget it kind of thing. You have to keep an eye on your systems, update your software, and stay ahead of those new threats.
Sounds like a lot to handle.
It can be.
Any advice for businesses that are feeling overwhelmed?
Don't be afraid to ask for help. There are a lot of cybersecurity consultants and experts out there who can help you navigate all this.
All right, so we've covered a lot in this second part of our deep dive. From insurance to international cooperation to the latest cybersecurity technologies.
And we've given some practical tips for businesses to improve their security.
Ready for the final part of our journey?
I am.
Let's do it. Welcome back to our deep dive. You know, we've covered so much. From the threats out there to all these new regulations coming in the UK, in the EU, and even how it's affecting things like cyber insurance and, just how important international cooperation is going to be.
Yeah, and all the new tech coming out, like AI and quantum computing, it's really changing the game.
It really is. Cybersecurity is such a fast-moving area. Where do you see this all going in the next few years?
Well, predicting the future of cybersecurity is tough. Kind of like predicting the weather. It's always changing. So many different factors at play.
That's true. But are there any big trends or things you think are going to have a big impact?
Oh, for sure. I think one thing we're going to see more of is this convergence of IT and what's called operational technology, or OT. As more and more devices get connected, it just creates more opportunities for attacks.
So attacks on critical infrastructure, like power grids or transportation systems, because those rely on OT a lot.
Exactly. And those attacks can have huge consequences, not just for businesses, but for everyone.
Okay, so that's one trend to watch. What else?
I think the attacks themselves are going to get more sophisticated.
We talked about AI-powered attacks earlier, but what else is out there?
Well, we're seeing attacks that are more targeted, more persistent, and harder to even detect. The attackers are always coming up with new tricks, like social engineering and zero-day exploits, to get around traditional security.
So it's an arms race.
Pretty much. And that's why it's so important to have a multi-layered approach to security. You need multiple layers of protection, because no single solution is going to stop everything.
So you're basically assuming some attacks will get through.
Yeah, it's about being realistic.
Okay, so you need to have backups and plans in place.
Exactly. And that brings me to another trend: resilience. It's not just about preventing attacks, it's about being able to bounce back quickly and minimize the damage.
Kind of like what Dora is trying to do with the financial sector.
Right. And I think we're going to see that focus on resilience become more widespread.
Okay, so cybersecurity is getting even more complex. How can businesses keep up?
Well, first and foremost, cybersecurity has to be a top priority. You have to invest in it, the right people, processes, and technologies.
Right, it's not just about spending money. It's about being smart with it.
Exactly. And businesses need to stay informed about the latest threats and vulnerabilities, keep up with industry news and best practices, work with security experts.
And make sure everyone in the organization is on board.
Absolutely. Everyone needs to be aware of the risks.
Yeah.
Security awareness training is crucial.
Okay, so a lot of challenges. But is there anything to be optimistic about?
Oh, definitely. We're making progress. There's more collaboration between governments, industry, and researchers, which is really important for sharing information.
And there's some really smart people working on new security technologies.
Yeah, we're seeing advancements in areas like threat intelligence, behavioral analytics, deception technologies. All these things are making it harder for the attackers to succeed.
So as the threats evolve, so do our defenses.
That's the key.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive. You've given us a lot to think about.
Hopefully it's given you a better understanding of where things are headed with cybersecurity.
It has, and you've given some really great advice, too, on what businesses can do to protect themselves.
And something Felicity Oswald said really stuck with me. She said, "We are past the point of running unsupported systems. It is not tenable."
That's a powerful statement.
It is.
Right. So stay vigilant, stay proactive, and stay secure.
That's the best advice I can give. And remember, knowledge is power. So stay informed.
Until next time, happy deep diving.